right. Thank you all for joining. Intro to Space Utilization Analytics for Workplaces. My name is Ari Kepnes, and I'm the Director of Market Research here at Density. And I'm joined by Rob Grazioli, who is the Head of Product Design. He's also a co-founder of Density. And we will be today talking about who we are here at our company Density, the importance of utilization data in the context of the workplace. And then we will have Rob present some of this in context to our own customers and how space utilization is driving business value in real ways. And then we will take your questions, a Q&A. So at the bottom of your screen, you should notice, or at the top, a folder that says Q plus A, and you can press that as we're going and leave questions, and we will be able to answer them at the end. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. We know you're busy. We know you have other things, and we appreciate it. So at the end of this presentation, we'll be sending along the recording. And this whole thing, presentation, should be just about 20 minutes, and then with your questions. So we will try and respect your time as we go forward. So who is Density? What is our company here? We were founded in 2014 with people who have alums from Microsoft, Apple, and SAP. We are the new data platform for the connected workplace. We are redefining occupancy analytics with state-of-the-art computer vision and algorithms that are able to detect in real time how people are using the physical world, how people are using buildings, how many people are in different parts of a building. And so we're able to help organizations connect the two largest assets, the people and their workplace. And we have worked with some of the largest Fortune 500 companies across global companies from telecom, finance, as well as in tech. And this is just a kind of way that we are thinking about how there's a new generation of people in workplace, whether it's workplace teams, facility, or even from the construction design, that are trying to think about, how do I have the data that I need to make the decisions that my employees require. So today we're going to kind of have this theme here of Goldilocks. Now, why would I bring up a children's story for a presentation on space utilization analytics? Well, Goldilocks is actually an interesting tale because it shows the importance of us interacting with our built environment and also measuring and understanding how different humans use different spaces. So Goldilocks kind of goes into one bed or tries one porridge, and then that doesn't work for her. Then she goes to the next. And it takes her kind of the 3 times to keep on getting exactly what she needs. And it's only a process of this feedback loop between her and the different parts of the home that she's kind of experimenting with. And the people who are kind of leading this industry forward, at least our clients, we've noticed, they're taking a similar approach. They're trying to test out what works. They're measuring how their employees are using different spaces. They understand that not all employees need the same thing, but they appreciate those differences to create a workplace experience that works. And that's kind of the framework. Someone called it the golden era workplace here that we have entered into, where experience is at the center, and so data is required. Now, the problem is that in order to kind of create an effective workplace, there's these 2 different ways, almost operating systems or mindsets that you have to have. There's the employee experience, which is kind of almost become a buzzword in some ways, but it's this hospitality mindset of serving so that employees can choose your office, and it becomes a competitive advantage from a company perspective in recruiting and retention. And then on the right side here, we have cost efficiency, where at the end of the day, a lot of the people that we work with in workplaces are reporting to the CFO, or they're even, if they are reporting to the COO, there's still this kind of mindset of what is the ROI, what is the benefit to any of the decisions that we're making in the workplace today. So people who are kind of trying to create these experiences for employees are stuck between this weird balancing act that is inherently unresolved. And, the search to right-size real estate, or the search to really get this right, to provide the right type of space that is both going to be an employee mindset or employee experience centered, as well as taking into account the cost efficiencies, it historically hasn't happened. And we see the pendulum swing between things like, or fads you could call them, between cubicles and open offices, or some sort of trend that doesn't really get to the root of, are the employees having the experiences that they need? And when these are done the right way, then of course they do provide that. For example, the open office, it was kind of born out of this need to have a variety of different spaces. And of course, when it does that, it is able to provide the employees all these different choices of what they need. But when it's done poorly, it just becomes a substitute for cramming more people in and becomes just about efficiency. And they don't have those other options. And the similar thing happened with the cubicles. It was born out of this idea from Herman Miller, the Action Office, that you could have these modular, beautiful workstations in the top right. You see that. But then when it became just about cost efficiency, it just kind of became this kind of sardine Taylorist factory mindset of let's cram people in. So the way to resolve this inherent tension is to understand how are people actually using space, right? So you want to understand, are my employees using this asset that I'm going to create? How are they using this room versus another? And 83% of CRE executives today see space utilization as a top metric for decision making. Now, if you don't know what that is, we're just going to define it pretty broadly right now, which is an understanding of occupancy over time. So how many people, let's say, are in this room versus how many people was this room intended to hold over time. And then you can start to understand how are people using the space, right? So if it's halfway utilized, it's maybe 50% of what it was intended to at any given time. And you can start to really understand how your space performs so that you can create something that's going to meet their needs, but also not be being wasteful. So the uses here and the benefits to actually getting data on how are people using space are threefold. You can reduce costs because you're not spending money on places that aren't being used. You can simplify space planning around data and validate needs. And I think the last one is the thing that we're just starting to see. We've worked with a number of tech companies in the Bay Area specifically, and they're really adopting almost this like software digital mindset to validate, hey, if we have 3 chairs in this room, how is that being used versus when we make it into just a normal conference room? And they're validating those needs with data based on space use. Is it being used more or less? So the overarching theme here we're talking about is experience and efficiency and using utilization to get there. But there's also kind of this overarching problem here, which is around underutilization and unmet needs. So even though we're talking about the need to understand how are humans using space, historically that doesn't happen. About 40% of corporate real estate is empty but paid for, and that's in a world where, on average, the cost per square foot before all the operating expenses is above $30 a square foot for the first time ever. And then also CR execs are not happy with how they're using space at the company. So, they may have rooms that are designed for certain things that are being used in different ways than they intended. And then employees, they're caring more about the employee experience and workplace more than ever. It's a strategic advantage, but they're also leaving if it doesn't really meet their needs. So at the end of the day, the baseline level is, how are people using the space? People are voting with their feet for the spaces that they use. So let's get some basic data on how they are using the space as it was designed or not. So I'm going to now let Rob take over here and talk through some examples of how this can be used in practice. So Rob, do you want to kind of share something here?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Ari.
Yeah.
So Ari brought up a great point in that I think the workplace is becoming more and more a place for employees to enjoy themselves and less of a place to just get right to work. So I'm going to walk through a couple of examples of density customers using people count data to sort of solve their problems. I'm going to touch on allocation in the workplace, so getting people the right spaces that they need. I'm going to talk about managing higher traffic spaces or amenity type spaces to ensure that those are operating more efficiently, and the experience is better for employees. And then of course the higher level issue, that 40% number that Ari touched on. And I'll give you a sneak preview of a tool we're experimenting with to help people make better real estate decisions across their entire portfolio. So we had a Fortune 5. We have a Fortune 500 company managing space for a new labs team. Initially, they converted individual office space. So the old school, one person gets this big office into team spaces that would accommodate anywhere from 1 to 10 people at times. And almost immediately after they did that, they started getting requests for more space from this team. Um, and I think their initial inclination is to get the team the space that they need. So they thought they would need more space. And some of the rooms would validate that. So they were able to demonstrate that indeed the rooms would peak out around 8 people, and then you'd have small to medium sized meetings throughout the day. But a lot of the other rooms never came close to those peaks. So what you're seeing here is a lot of smaller conversations happening. At most, 2 people in the room. A lot of times, one person in the room. Um, so what that revealed was they had the physical space that they need. It's just that the space was not organized properly. So they instead of moving the team or trying to find more space and taking away from other teams, they were actually able to use the same space, essentially take 3 of those rooms, carve them in half, and change the function a little bit. So again, a really good example of using what you have. And it's usually more about making sure the space is correct rather than just having more of it. Another Fortune 500 company sort of is managing their cafeteria, and what they're really looking for is the ability to plan into the future more specifically. So they were counting plates. However, employees use many plates. So they really wanted to get a better sense for how many people were actually visiting the cafeteria. So we were able to deliver predictive analytics on top of that, so they could plan into the future with some reasonable margin of error. But the other thing that was interesting is that they were planning for the same number of people every day. And what we realized is that only 25% of the employees were actually showing up to the office on Fridays. So obviously that was reflected in the cafeteria attendance, and they're now able to plan accordingly and ensure that they have the appropriate staff when the cafe spikes. And then they're also able to, we also built a mobile application that allows the same company to expose the data to their employees and help load balance the actual traffic to these spaces. So this applies to a lot of other amenity spaces like little cafes or kitchen areas or bathrooms, stuff like that. So it's turned out to be quite useful and helps, of course, maintain the employee experience. So lastly, we're experimenting with a view of our analytics that sort of focuses on the broader portfolio. So you get a complete picture at a high level of how your buildings are performing in terms of attendance. And you can also sort of focus in on specific spaces or specific buildings and look at the allocation across those buildings and look at how they compare geographically. So how is attendance in one place compared to attendance in another place? This becomes particularly effective if you have team allocations. So if you have 2 buildings in New York City, for example, both contain engineering teams, only there's enough space for those teams to exist in one building and they're close together. Maybe you make a decision to reallocate those teams. And then, of course, helps better plan for future real estate decisions. So if you're interested in trying this out, please reach out. We're happy to get you set up with the beta and get your feedback early on. That's it for me, Ari.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen here again. Just one moment, and we will get back underway. So I think a couple things to point out that you had mentioned, Rob, is this idea of implicit in what you were saying is this idea that you need to be able to count people in order to understand how maybe a cafe is being used or a cafeteria or even an office. And so if you want to understand how people are using a space to get the business value that you just talked through, you need to be able to understand how many people are in the space. You need to be able to count people. And that problem is really difficult because humans do different things and they use different spaces in different way. They're moving. It's not easy to get a real-time accurate count. So this is kind of our approach, and the way that we've been able to differentiate is because we have real-time and anonymous count of how people are using the space. So this is a framework here that we're using that allows us to have these algorithms that are looking for human shapes. And as people exit a space, they're able to discern a human object versus something else without invading people's privacy. So I just want to kind of put this in the context here. We've established how utilization is important. And then we've talked about on a building level, a room level, and then a floor or amenity level, how you can then derive value from it. And it's all required to have a basic understanding of this type of people counting in every space, whether it's your office attendance or cafe or room. And the way that we do it is we have this device that sits above a threshold or a defined space. And as people are entering and exiting, it's scanning for human objects and is able to tell in real time. Now, I think what's important to kind of frame this as is that we are collecting data on how many people are using different spaces, and we're seeing more and more the need to integrate that into all of these systems. And so if you believe that the workplace is something that should be user-centered, it should be centered on your employees, then that means that you should have a sense of how they're using or how many people are in different spaces and in every application that you use. And so we're seeing more and more of our data being piped in to all of these systems and not just on our own kind of dashboard analytics. So 3 takeaways that I want to kind of make sure that we get away with here, because it is pretty overwhelming and there's a lot of different things, are that all roads do begin with data. And that, so if you want to make a decision from a CRE perspective or a space planning perspective, then the question that we're hearing more and more is, well, what kind of data do I need? And it usually starts with, well, how am I using my current space? One specific, I'll just say, story with that is that we actually found across all of our density customers, all of our conference rooms, we saw that they were being built for different sizes and assumptions in the same way that Rob kind of presented. But we found a really clear theme that there was need for 1-person areas and there was need for 4 to 6-person meeting rooms. That was the peak occupancy there. And then larger meetings really only stayed between 10 and 20. So you could have 20-person rooms that were cut in half. So those type of insights that you can really understand, how are my employees, my own employees, using space, and how do I create a space for them? It starts with data. The second is starting with a discrete project. I think that there's a lot of buzzwords now around IoT, utilization, things like that. And the challenge is, if you already have a project underway, the question is, how do I actually just have data that can help? So usually the place to start is just office or building level attendance. And there are badge swipe mechanisms for that, but that isn't really getting entrances and exits. And there's also tailgating issues. So usually what happens is our customers start with a discrete project, and it's based around a specific problem that they want to solve. And one of those is the office attendance. And then the last thing to remember here is around, people are not ones and zeros. So even though we're talking a lot about data, we have this optimization mindset, but really at the end of the day, it's about understanding that people vote with their feet for the places that they use. And in real time, understanding crowds is what makes a better experience. So you have to put the user at the center, and all of this data can be supplemented with user interviews and really understanding of who the people are that you're serving. So some of the takeaways there, I hope those are things that you can kind of go on and think about in your own organization. So we have a slew of questions here that we're going to answer. And I'm going to leave this up as I kind of go through these questions. Let's see. It looks like you summarize utilization. Do you then recommend how the amount of space should be changed in response? So I will answer to that, that we're seeing more and more that people who are requiring space utilization metrics already have a hypothesis, whether it's, do I need more conference rooms or less? How am I using this space versus that? I'm planning for a new headquarters. And so we will really try to understand what problem they're trying to solve and make sure that the data then feeds into those decisions. But yes, the answer is we have had different clients who have used our data to make different decisions about space allocation. How does the device integrate with other systems and tools? Great question. So this is really based around this concept of workplaces can all be enriched by a basic understanding of how many people are in a space. And so what we do is we have an API, which really is a fancy word for 2 different systems talking to each other, where we're able to bring in data from the density device and both the software and the hardware, and pump it into what other system that you use. And so if you have a specific integration that you want to talk about, we're happy to do that. We're seeing more and more integrations even on a room booking level. So we can integrate with things like Team and Google Calendar to try and understand how are my meeting rooms being booked versus used. That's just one example. Can the tool recognize what activities are being performed? So people meeting, working versus over the phone. So because we are being installed in workplaces, there's a lot of sensitivity around privacy, and we try to be a company that is, really respectful of how people want to deal with things like anonymity. There's a lot of discussion now about the role of privacy in physical space and things like facial recognition, video cameras. We're not a video camera, and we don't collect any person identifiable information. So what that means is that you have a very easy way of deploying across your whole portfolio. But it means that we're also trying not to understand on an individual level what one person is doing. So we are able to understand things like, like I said, comparing how meeting spaces are used versus how many people book them. And so you can get a real understanding of, was this being used for one person to do some sort of a focus work, or was it for 3 or 6 or 10 people? And that's data that really helps things get going. And then some of the other best practices that comes out using density products, smaller meetings or more collaborative spaces. So yeah, I do think that one thing that I'll just share is that when we're looking at all of the conference rooms, there was a clear theme that one person rooms, there's never enough because they'll use larger rooms than you want them to. So the question is, what should you do for individual focused room in the world in the era of open office? And we're seeing a lot of people moving to these singular phone booths, or singular pods, which are kind of like makeshift cubicles in some ways. So we're seeing the need for one person areas, and then we're seeing this cluster of 4 to 6 person meetings. And so what we're using, what we're really understanding there is that in a typical day, the peak occupancy really isn't exceeding more than 5 people in these rooms, but over a 6-month period, it does get up to 8 sometimes. So we recommend that you have some of these 4 to 6 person rooms, and then larger rooms that can handle 8 or above. We're seeing a lot more flexible spaces. I was at NeoCon last week or 2 weeks ago, and there was a lot of these spaces that are modular, and those are really helping with this whole open office thing and things like that we can talk through. So if you have specific questions around that, please reach out. But we will also be sharing a new report around some standards of conference room in the next few weeks. So please subscribe to our blog, and we will be able to send that over. Okay, I think I'll just take a couple more here. So how does it actually get installed? Okay, that's a good question. So we have these devices that you put above a doorway or above a threshold, or even an entrance, and then they connect to either PoE or Wi-Fi in a standard outlet, and they're constantly scanning in real time without invading people's privacy how many people are entering and exiting. And then that data gets shot into whatever application or our own dashboard to derive those insights. And it looks like we should be all set here. So if you have any specific questions or you want to really understand what this could do for you in terms of utilization, please reach out. I will say that that there are many projects today that are enriched with utilization data, everything from real time to space planning. All of the different ways that people are thinking about improving workplaces today can usually be enriched with workplace utilization. So please feel free to reach out, and we will also help with a tailored program assessment if you do reach out to us at density.io. And you can reach out to either Rob and I or to sales. So thank you so much, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.